People assume betrayal is loud. They imagine screaming arguments, sudden disappearances, dramatic confessions. But the most destructive betrayals begin quietly, inside relationships that look stable, successful, and untouchable from the outside. This was one of those marriages, and if you believe wealth protects people from manipulation, stay until the end of this story. Because sometimes money doesn't prevent betrayal, it attracts it. When they met, he was already wealthy. Not the kind of wealthy that announces itself, not flashy, not public. He was the kind of man who built companies, not reputations. Reserved, methodical, obsessed with structure. His businesses were layered, holdings, subsidiaries, assets spread across jurisdictions. Nothing emotional, nothing impulsive, everything designed to last. She entered his life at the perfect moment, fresh, elegant enough to seem refined, intelligent enough to seem trustworthy. She didn't push, she didn't rush, she learned. That was her strength. Their relationship developed slowly. He appreciated that. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something: access, opportunity, proximity. She appeared different. She asked questions about him, not his money. She listened more than she spoke. She never mentioned percentages or ownership. That silence felt like sincerity. What he didn't realize was that silence can also be strategy. They married after a few years. The wedding was tasteful, private, no spectacle. From the outside, it looked like balance. A powerful man who had found stability, a woman who had found security. Inside the marriage, things appeared calm. She integrated herself into his life naturally. Control. She accepted responsibility. She learned how the companies worked. Not aggressively, gradually. She asked to help with small things at first. Schedules, correspondence, internal communication. He saw this as support. He encouraged it. He believed in partnership. Children came later, planned, welcomed. They changed everything. Children create trust faster than time ever could. They blur lines. They turn caution into confidence. He didn't just trust her anymore. He relied on her. She became part of the system. And systems, once integrated, are hard to remove. Over time, she gained more access, more signatures, more authority. She began attending meetings in his absence, speaking on his behalf, representing his interests. Everyone assumed she was loyal. Why wouldn't they? She was his wife, of his children. Trust followed her automatically. That was the most valuable asset she acquired. But something else was happening beneath the surface. Something invisible to people who weren't paying attention. She was watching. Not him, the structure. She learned which companies generated revenue, which ones carried risk, which ones existed for protection. She learned where the money moved, and more importantly, where it didn't. She never asked for half. She never demanded ownership. She didn't need to. She understood something fundamental. If you control timing, you don't need confrontation. The affair began quietly, predictably, with someone beneath them in hierarchy, an employee, close enough to know details, far enough to be underestimated. It wasn't passion, it was convenience, shared proximity, secrecy, shared resentment. She never spoke badly about her husband. That would have raised suspicion. She framed herself as misunderstood, controlled, invisible. That narrative attracts loyalty from the wrong people. He discovered the affair long before she expected, not through emotion, through data. Patterns don't lie. He noticed inconsistencies, communications that didn't align, decisions that didn't follow logic. He didn't confront her, that wasn't his nature. Instead, he observed, quietly, carefully. And what he saw was worse than infidelity. It was preparation. She wasn't planning to leave him empty-handed. She was planning to leave him exposed. She believed that marriage guaranteed entitlement, that divorce would divide everything equally, that courts would simplify what he had built over decades. Complexity could be flattened. She believed she was smarter than the system. She was wrong. He didn't react emotionally. He didn't accuse. He didn't threaten. He did something far more dangerous. He reorganized, slowly, legally, silently. He separated the empire, not in appearance, In reality, he transferred profitable companies into structures beyond marital reach. Trusts, family holdings, entities anchored to his mother. Everything that generated real revenue moved quietly. What remained was one company, the one she understood best, the one she believed was the core. It wasn't. It was a shell. He left it in his name. He made no attempt to hide it. In fact, he made it look central. She noticed. She assumed he was careless. That assumption sealed her fate. When she filed for divorce, she was confident, waited for the perfect moment. The affair was open now. The employee had promised loyalty. She expected wealth, freedom, control. She believed she had won. What she didn't understand was that victory requires knowing what game you're in, and she had misunderstood it entirely. This wasn't a story about a man trying to punish his wife. It was a story about a man refusing to be dismantled. He didn't want revenge. He wanted symmetry. If she wanted ownership, she would have it. If she wanted control, she would receive it. Completely. The divorce was finalized without drama. She walked away with the company she believed mattered, the company she believed would secure her future. She smiled. She thought the hardest part was over. She was wrong, because companies don't collapse loudly. They collapse on paper, and paper doesn't scream. Happened next didn't take months. It didn't take years. It took 2 days. She believed control came from proximity. That was her first mistake. Being close to the center of something does not mean you understand how it works. It only means you can see parts of it, and she had seen enough to convince herself she knew everything. After the divorce papers were filed, she moved quickly. Not recklessly, decisively. She assumed momentum was on her side. The company she received looked impressive on the surface. Large offices, hundreds of employees, active contracts. She stepped into her new role with confidence. The employee she had been involved with stood beside her, supportive, eager. He believed the same thing she did, that they had outsmarted a man who trusted structure too much. What neither of them understood was that structure isn't rigid. It's selective. On her first day in full control, she called meetings. As a successor, but as an owner, she spoke with authority. Employees listened politely. Executives nodded. No one challenged her. She mistook that for respect. It wasn't. It was distance. People who work inside real systems recognize when power is temporary. They wait. She requested financial reports, detailed ones. She wanted to understand cash flow, liquidity, exposure. The numbers arrived. They looked uncomfortable, but not alarming. High expenses, tight margins. That was normal, she told herself. Growth costs money. She believed problems were solvable with confidence and pressure. She believed she could renegotiate. She believed she could restructure. She believed the real value was in the brand. Another mistake. Brands don't pay debts. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the rest of the empire continued to operate. Quietly. Companies she no longer had access to. Entities she no longer appeared on. They produced revenue without interruption. Clients didn't notice the divorce. Partners didn't ask questions. The system didn't react. That should have worried her. It didn't. She believed disruption would follow her. She believed the center of gravity had moved. It hadn't. Her affair partner began to notice cracks first. Emails went unanswered. Vendors demanded faster payments. Credit lines required confirmation. She dismissed his concerns. Fear, she said, was normal in the beginning. She told him this was what leadership felt like. Pressure, responsibility. He wanted to believe her, because belief was cheaper than doubt. The second day brought meetings she hadn't planned. Banks, lawyers, auditors, hostile. Neutral. Neutral is worse. Neutral means process. They asked questions she couldn't answer. They referenced agreements she hadn't read. They mentioned obligations she didn't know existed. Deferred liabilities, contingent debts. Exposure tied to future performance. She smiled through it. She took notes. She promised follow-up. She still believed this was manageable. Then the first notice arrived. Formal, polite, unavoidable. A payment due. Large, immediate. She checked the accounts. Liquidity wasn't there. She asked about internal transfers. There were none. She asked about reserves. They were restricted. She asked about parent companies. There were none. Not anymore. Confusion turned into irritation. Irritation turned into urgency. Urgency turned into fear. Calling people. Former contacts. Former partners. People who used to answer. They didn't. Not because they were loyal to him. Because legally they no longer had any relationship with her. She had inherited a company, not a network. By the end of the second day, the number appeared. 2 billion. That was the figure attached to the obligations she now controlled. 2 billion in accumulated exposure. Debt structured over time. Designed to be absorbed by entities with real cash flow. Entities that no longer belonged to her. She stared at the screen. She refreshed it. Nothing changed. The realization didn't come as panic. It came as disbelief. She replayed conversations, moments, decisions. She tried to locate the moment where this could have been stopped. There wasn't one. Suddenly, everything had gone right slowly. For him. Her affair partner began asking questions. Urgent ones. What does this mean for us? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because us no longer existed in any meaningful way. This wasn't a shared future. It was a shared collapse. She called him. Once. He didn't answer. She left a message. Not angry. Careful. Professional. She framed it as confusion. As misunderstanding. As something that could be clarified. He listened to the message. He didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of closure. Courts didn't intervene. Why would they? Nothing illegal had occurred. Everything had been signed, reviewed, executed. She had received exactly what she asked for. Ownership, control, responsibility. Headlines began quietly. Not dramatic, not sensational, just factual. The company was in distress. Creditors were circling. Analysts were confused. They didn't understand how something so large had become so fragile so quickly. They didn't see the design. They never do. She understood then that wealth isn't money. It's insulation. And she had stripped herself of it willingly. She had mistaken access for ownership, visibility for power, confidence for understanding. Somewhere else, far removed from the noise, the man she had tried to dismantle lived normally. The system continued. The companies grew. The child he shared with her visited. The world did not collapse. It simply moved on without her. And that was the cruelest part. Not that she lost everything, but that the loss was invisible to the life she had wanted to replace. The collapse didn't happen all at once. That's what made it unbearable. If everything had fallen in a single moment, shock might have numbed the damage. But this wasn't shock. This was erosion. Slow, public, irreversible. At first, she believed perception could save her. She hired advisors, public relations consultants, crisis managers, people who specialized in reshaping narratives. They asked her the same question repeatedly. Where is the money? She didn't have an answer. And narratives don't survive without resources. Creditors became louder, not aggressive, persistent. They didn't threaten. They documented. Every document tightened the noose. Contracts she hadn't read resurfaced. Clauses she didn't understand activated. Guarantees she didn't know she had inherited became enforceable. She realized something too late. Hadn't been given a failing company. She had been given the liabilities sink, the place where risk had always lived. She had just stepped into it voluntarily. Her affair partner left, not dramatically, efficiently. He understood numbers well enough to recognize when loyalty had no upside. He didn't say goodbye. He stopped answering messages. That silence hurt more than his departure, because it mirrored her own strategy. And now she was on the receiving end. Employees noticed the shift. Morale dropped. Rumors spread. People don't need confirmation to sense instability. They feel it. Productivity declined. Resignations followed. She held meetings, spoke about vision, about confidence, about future growth. The room listened politely, but no one believed her. Belief requires credibility, requires history. She had neither. Legal notices began arriving daily, each one colder than the last. Deadlines, penalties, enforcement mechanisms. 2 billion wasn't a headline. It was a reality measured in increments. Interest, fees, escalation. She stopped sleeping. Her phone never stopped vibrating. She began to avoid mirrors, not because of guilt, because of recognition. She no longer recognized herself as powerful. She was reactive, and reaction is the opposite of control. She tried to negotiate. Banks didn't negotiate. They enforced. She tried to sell assets. There were none that weren't already encumbered. She tried to leverage the brand. The brand was attached to the debt. No buyer wants identity without insulation. The media picked up the story, not sensationally. Worse. Analysts asked how a company of that size collapsed so fast. They speculated mismanagement, poor oversight. They didn't accuse her directly. They didn't need to. Public perception doesn't require accusation. It requires association. Her name became linked to failure. She thought about him constantly, not with anger, with disbelief. She replayed conversations, moments where he had said nothing, moments she had mistaken for ignorance. She realized then that silence can be more strategic than speech. He hadn't warned her, because warning would have implied mercy. He had chosen symmetry instead. She had wanted control. She had received it, fully. She reached out again, this time not professionally, personally. She asked to meet, not to negotiate, to understand, cruelly, simply. There was nothing left to explain. Explanation doesn't reverse structure. At night, alone, she calculated futures. None of them were good. Bankruptcy wasn't escape, it was exposure. The debt wouldn't disappear. It would follow her. Her children would feel it. Not immediately, eventually. That realization broke something in her. Not emotionally, fundamentally. She had believed intelligence was enough, that planning was enough, that proximity to power equaled power. She had believed wealth was something you could take. She understood now that wealth is something you design, and she had never designed anything. She had only positioned herself near it. The final confirmation came quietly, a legal summary, clear, unemotional. She was personally liable, no protections, no buffers, no shields. Everything she had thought she was escaping had settled onto her shoulders. 2 billion wasn't a number anymore. It was her future. Somewhere else, life continued. The company she never touched grew steadily. The man she had underestimated lived outside the chaos. The child laughed. The system held. And she understood the final cruelty. The world doesn't punish betrayal. It ignores collapse. That night, she sat in the dark and realized something devastating. She hadn't been outplayed emotionally. She had been outplanned. There is a moment in every collapse when urgency disappears. Not because the problem is solved, but because the mind understands that no action will reverse it. That was the moment she reached. At first, she had believed there would be an intervention, a pause, a negotiation, a last-minute correction. That's how power usually works. Someone steps in, someone fixes it, someone absorbs the damage. But no one came, because no one was responsible anymore. She was. The legal process moved forward without drama. Courts don't express disappointment. They process facts. Signatures were reviewed. Structures were confirmed. Responsibilities were assigned. Everything pointed in one direction. Ownership meant liability, and liability doesn't care about intention. She became careful about where she went. Not out of fear, recognition. People looked at her differently now. Not with anger, with distance. Distance is worse. Distance means relevance has ended. She was no longer associated with power. She was associated with collapse. Former allies disappeared quietly, not because they were disloyal, because association had become expensive. People who survive in elite environments understand one rule well. You don't attach yourself to falling structures. You step away, silently. Her children noticed the change before anyone explained it. Schedules shifted. Homes changed. Certainty evaporated. Children don't understand debt, but they understand instability. She watched them adapt and felt something she hadn't felt during the entire collapse. Guilt, not because of the money, because she had believed she was building a future. Instead, she stopped checking the numbers, not because they improved, because they stopped meaning anything. 2 billion wasn't something you paid, it was something you lived under. It reshaped time. Every decision now referenced it. Every future included it. She tried once more to understand how it had happened. Not legally, conceptually. She revisited the moment she had felt victorious. The day she signed. The confidence. The certainty. She saw it clearly now. She had accepted. Accepted responsibility she didn't understand. Accepted control she couldn't sustain. Accepted a role designed for failure. The media moved on. That was another kind of punishment. Stories about collapse don't last. They're replaced by new collapses. Her name faded quickly, but consequences don't fade. Settle. Quietly. Permanently. Somewhere else, the man she had married continued his life. Not extravagantly. Not publicly. He didn't celebrate her fall. He didn't speak about it. He simply existed beyond it. His companies expanded. Not dramatically. Predictably. Because predictability is what real systems produce. The child they shared spent time with him. Safe. Unaware. Unburdened by adult complexity. That was the final asymmetry. The child inherited stability. She inherited exposure. She understood then what she had misunderstood from the beginning. Power isn't access. Power is insulation. The ability to absorb shock without collapsing. She had never had that. She had only been close to someone who did. She thought about revenge. Briefly. It passed. Revenge requires leverage. None. She thought about apology. It felt irrelevant. Nothing she could say would change the structure. Structures don't respond to emotion. They respond to design. Her world became smaller. Not poorer, more precise. She counted minutes now, deadlines, consequences. There was no space for illusion anymore. Illusion requires safety. One evening alone, she finally accepted what had happened. Not emotionally, intellectually. She had tried to steal an empire, and she had succeeded. She just hadn't realized which part of the empire she was taking. The man she underestimated hadn't destroyed her. He had allowed her to own the consequences of her own plan. That was the cruelty, and the lesson. She would live with this, not as a villain, not as a victim, but as someone who mistook proximity for power, and paid the price. Time didn't heal anything. It clarified. That was the final cruelty of it. As weeks passed, the urgency that had once dominated her days gave way to routine. Not a comforting routine, a constrained one. Every decision now carried weight. Every option came with limits. The debt didn't scream anymore. It sat. Waiting. She stopped trying to explain herself. There was no audience left. Those who had admired her confidence during the divorce no longer answered calls. Those who had praised her strength now avoided association. Not because they judged her, because collapse is contagious, and no one wants to be nearby when gravity takes over. She reviewed the divorce agreement one final time, not looking for loopholes, looking for meaning. There was none. Everything had been done cleanly, legally, irrevocably, believing she was taking control. In reality, she had accepted containment. The employee she had trusted vanished completely. No confrontation, no apology. just absence. That absence echoed something painfully familiar. It was the same silence she had used when she thought she was winning. Now it belonged to her. Her children adjusted faster than she did. Children always do. They don't cling to narratives, they adapt to environments. They noticed new homes, new schedules, new rules. They didn't ask about the billions, they asked about stability. She had no answer. At night, when distractions disappeared, she replayed the moment everything had shifted. Not the affair, not the divorce. The moment she realized she had misunderstood him. She had believed his quiet nature was passivity, that his restraint was weakness. Intelligence was something you could observe. She hadn't realized it was something you felt only after it moved. Somewhere else, life continued without interruption. That was the most difficult part to accept. There was no collapse on his side, no fallout, no visible consequence. The companies he no longer controlled publicly continued to grow. The system absorbed change the way it had been designed to. Without noise, without attention, he spent time with his child, not as compensation, as responsibility. The child didn't know the story, didn't need to. Children don't inherit betrayal, they inherit structure, and structure had been preserved. The contrast became unavoidable. She lived inside consequences. He lived beyond them. Not because he was cruel, because he had planned. One evening she sat alone, and finally understood the sentence that had haunted her since the divorce. "You didn't just want half," she whispered to herself. "You wanted the center." And she had taken it. The part that carried weight. The part that absorbed shock. The part designed to fail if mishandled. She realized then that he hadn't outplayed her emotionally. Emotion had never been the battlefield. He had outdesigned her. And design doesn't argue. It executes. There was no dramatic ending. No courtroom reversal. No sudden redemption. Life simply settled into its new shape. Smaller, heavier, permanent. She would spend years untangling obligations, negotiating deadlines, managing reputations that no longer mattered. The debt wouldn't define her publicly, but it would define her privately. Every day, the man she had once believed she controlled didn't speak about her. Didn't need to. Silence was enough. Silence had always been enough. In the end, there were no villains, no heroes. Only decisions made under the illusion of control. She believed marriage gave her access to an empire. She believed proximity meant power. She believed intelligence was louder than structure. She was wrong. She didn't steal his empire. She inherited its collapse. He didn't ruin her. He simply let her own what she asked for.